Study Section 9, Inflation, Unemployment, and Output. Introduction. When federal government embarks on fiscal expansion, the purpose is to reduce unemployment. Inflation may likely increase in the process. Increase in demand through fiscal or monetary expansion will lead to increase in output, but the attendant inflation rate will reduce purchasing power and hence reduction in output. Therefore, there appears to be a connection among inflation, unemployment, and output. In Chapter 8, we have established the connection between inflation and unemployment. In this chapter, we shall extend this to include output. In particular, the question we shall answer in this chapter is that what is the level of output that is required to reduce unemployment to a certain acceptable level while keeping inflation rate as low as possible if the government should embark on fiscal expansion or the monetary authorities should embark on monetary expansion. We proceed by first developing a model that connects the three variables unemployment, inflation, and output, and then investigate how policy strategies can be used to answer the questions raised. Objectives of this chapter. At the end of this chapter, students are expected to be able to do the following: understand the connection between inflation and unemployment, explain the connection between output growth and unemployment, characterize the connection between output growth, money growth, and inflation rate, explain the Lucas critique, understand the nominal rigidities with respect to policy change, the Fisher-Taylor critique, model of inflation, unemployment, and output, the supply side. Recall that our task in this chapter is to investigate the connection between three important macroeconomic variables: output growth, inflation rate, and unemployment rate. To do this, we shall refer to some information pertaining to unemployment and inflation, the Phillips curve, which we have developed in the earlier chapters. We will then study the relationship between output growth and changes in unemployment, and later examine how aggregate demand responds to policy with respect to output growth, unemployment, and inflation. Our earlier understanding of the relationship between unemployment rate and inflation is summarized in equation 8.16 and replicated in equation 9.1 below. Now, if we assume that expected inflation this year is last year's actual inflation, the equation turns out to be what was established in equation 8.17 and replicated in equation 9.2 below. And as pointed out, this equation says that if actual unemployment exceeds natural rate of unemployment, inflation will fall, otherwise inflation will rise. However, if actual unemployment is the same as natural rate of unemployment, inflation will be constant. Where Yt is the growth rate of output, equation 9.3 says that changes in unemployment is a decreasing function of output. That is, when the rate of output increases, we expect changes in unemployment to reduce. If the rate of change in output growth rises by say 7%, we expect rate of change in unemployment to fall by 7%. In real world, there is no such one-for-one relation. The first scholar to force this proposition was Otto Okun. He collected data on output growth and plotted it against rate of change in unemployment for the US between 1960 and 1994. He, however, got an inverse relationship. In order to determine the magnitude, he subjected the graph to empirical investigation with the aid of regression and came up with the following result. This equation shows that a 1% increase in output growth leads to 3% as against 1% decrease in the rate of change in unemployment. Thus, departing from the prediction given in equation 9.3, the reason for the departure is because of the two assumptions underlying equation 9.3. Equation 9.4 tells us that labor force cannot be constant over time, and also that there is no one-for-one relation between output and unemployment. This is possible if we consider the fact that workers' productivity changes over time. For instance, if we increase workers by 1% and output increases by 2%, it means that physical labor contributes 1% to output while the productive capacity of the workers contributes the rest 1%. Therefore, if workers' productivity increases by 1% every year, increase in employment by 1% will lead to 2% increase in output every year. This implication of productivity on unemployment is that it will be impossible to target output that will keep unemployment at a reasonable constant level by neglecting labor productivity. For instance, assuming that the authorities ignore the productivity aspect and are targeting 2% output growth to keep unemployment constant, their thinking is that growth rate of unemployment will be 2% as well. But assuming that labor productivity grows at say 1%, output will actually grow by 3% and this will lead to increase in unemployment growth by 1%. Equation 9.4 actually reflects the fact that in the US, growth rate of labor force was 1% while productivity growth rate was 2% during that period. What the equation actually says is that the rate of output required to maintain the same level of unemployment is 3%, and according to Blanchard 2006, this is called the normal growth rate. The coefficient minus 0.4 in that equation shows the rate at which output growth deviates from its normal growth. Also, those at the administrative section, health, and accounting department together with the logistics section are hardly fired or hired during downturn or boom respectively. Furthermore, it is costly to train new staff during booming season. Thus, during economic slowdown, firms stay put whether they are important and costly to train staff with the hope that good time will come very soon. During booming period, rather than hiring more workers, they tend to advise the current workers to work overtime. During critical times, firms tend to advise workers to work few hours instead of laying them off. Thus, this labor holding effect necessitates the reason why there may not be a one-for-one response of unemployment growth rate to deviations in output growth. The second reason why we have such a coefficient is that labor participation rate is not constant. It also changes with respect to market condition. During booming period, the discouraged workers who are previously classified as out of labor force will regain their courage and begin to look for jobs. Thus, when new jobs are created, not all unemployment will be eventually fixed up because discouraged workers have moved to the labor force, and so if the jobs created are not very many, unemployment will tend to increase as employment increases. To fix up these two factors, we shall relax the assumption of the constancy of productivity, labor force, and the absence of labor hoarding. The following model is therefore specified instead of the one stated in equation 9.3, where C is the parameter that shows how unemployment growth responds to deviation of output, YT, from its normal growth, Y. Bear in mind that aggregate demand relation shows the relationship between output, real money stock, government spending and taxes. Our focus in this session is the money supply. Thus, we shall hold other factors that affect aggregate demand constant. The reason for this is to keep the analysis very simple and to make it interesting. Don't forget that it is also possible to examine the fiscal policy side and hold monetary policy constant. What we actually want to do here is to establish the effect of monetary supply on output growth. The abridged version of equation 7.4 is given in equation 9.6, where D measures the rate at which real money stock affects output. The equation says that demand is an increasing function of money stock. If money stock rises, demand will rise and this later leads to increase in output. Since our interest is on the rate of change, we can change all the variables in equation 9.6 to growth rate. Before we do that, note that the right-hand side equation of 9.6 is the real money supply. The rate of change in real money supply is equal to rate of change in nominal money supply less inflation. Thus, if growth rate of output is as defined earlier, growth rate of nominal money supply is MT while inflation is W, then equation 9.6 becomes. Now, first, consider a case in which inflation rate is equal to the growth rate of nominal supply. This implies that real money stock is constant as well as output growth rate. Now, consider the second scenario where inflation exceeds growth rate of money supply. Real money supply will fall steadily and output will also fall steadily. Now, if inflation falls short of nominal money supply, implying that real money stock rises steadily, demand and output will increase steadily. Thus, what the aggregate demand relation shows is that given nominal money growth, if inflation is high, demand will fall and output growth will decline. Conversely, the lower the inflation rate, the higher the output growth. Connecting the three equations, we are now ready to show the relationship between inflation, unemployment, and output. We do this by connecting equations 9.2, 9.5, and 9.7. That is, hence, in the long run, unemployment will return to a constant value and maintain the value consistently as long as M is equal to MT. Also, in the long run, we expect the growth rate of unemployment to be zero because the growth of unemployment and labor force is zero. Recall that the Okun's law tells us the level of output that keeps unemployment constant. Therefore, following Okun's law, output must grow at its nominal growth rate YT in the long run. This is especially demonstrated in equation 9.5 when hence, which is exactly what we are looking for. That is, when output is at its normal growth rate, change in unemployment is zero. This implies that unemployment this year is the same as it was last year. That is, at the normal output growth, aggregate demand relation given by 9.7 will be, which can be written as, or more specifically, equation 10.10 says that in the long run, the difference between nominal growth and nominal output growth is just inflation rate. Let us call the difference between nominal money growth and nominal output growth the adjusted nominal output growth. Hence, equation 9.7 tells us that in the long run, inflation must equal to adjusted nominal money growth. A simple arithmetic brings this clearer. If the monetary authorities adjust nominal money growth by 5% and nominal output is just 2%, then using equation 9.7, inflation must be 3%. This result can be interpreted in this way. Increase in output implies increase in income and hence increase in demand for real money demand. Thus, if output grows 5% per year, thus real money demand will also be 5%. Now, consider nominal money supply to say 3%, there will be pressure on demand for money to rise and this increases interest rate. If the household want to maintain the demand, price has to rise. And hence, inflation. What we have shown is that in the long run, inflation increases in one-for-one with the growth rate of nominal money supply. This proposition was established by Friedman and he said that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. To put it succinctly, the economists agree that fiscal stance, labor market distortions, goods market distortions, external shocks such as changes in oil price have no effect on inflation in the long run unless their changes lead to a higher nominal money supply. Don't forget that what we ascertain natural rate of unemployment include wage bargaining power and structure, market power, condition, government unemployment schemes, external shocks, etc., but not money growth. We have succeeded in establishing the connections with these three propositions. 1. In the long run, output grows at its normal rate. 2. In the long run, inflation must be equal to the difference between nominal money growth and nominal output growth. 3. In the long run, unemployment rate must equal to its natural rate. We can use graphical exposition to summarize these three submissions as presented in figure 9.1. The graph is plotted so as to show the relationship between inflation and unemployment rate. In the long run, unemployment will be at its natural level, say UN. When the economy is at its natural unemployment rate, we expect inflation to be the difference between growth of nominal money supply and normal output growth. This line will be horizontal and it cuts natural rate of unemployment rate at UN, point A. Now, consider a rise in nominal money supply by equation 9.7. Inflation increases from 2 and hence leads to a parallel shift of the inflation line. Since the economy is on its long run, the intersection will be A so that inflation increases by the same amount as the decrease in nominal money growth. Since natural rate of unemployment remains the same, it means output growth will remain the same. This is the core argument of Friedman that increase in nominal money supply leads to increase in inflation with no real effect on employment and output. Intuitively, this summation also shows that in the long run, traditional Phillips curve will break down. The analysis presented above tells us that in the short run, we can allow for higher inflation in order to reduce unemployment. However, in the long run, unemployment will not respond to changes in inflation because actual inflation is just the natural rate of inflation. However, in some economies, particularly the US, it was discovered that the level of inflation satisfying long-run output is very high and must be reduced. But why should we worry about inflation when unemployment is reasonable and output grows at its normal rate? We need to worry because there is a cost to high inflation. If this is so, by how much should we reduce inflation and at what speed? We shall answer this question by investigating how the US economists modeled inflation targeting. Consider equation 9.2, which is replicated below. It is also possible for the authorities to achieve its objectives by having 7 years of unemployment at 1% above natural rate. The important thing to note is that irrespective of the time span, the number of point year of unemployment is the same, that is 7, 1 times 7 in the first scenario, 2 times 3.5 in the second scenario, and 7 times 1 in the third scenario, in bracket. What is the meaning of all this? The authorities can choose the distribution of unemployment over time but cannot change the total number of the point year of unemployment. In our case, can take many dimensions, but point year 7 cannot be changed. Does that mean the speed of adjustment is important? Of course, no. If the natural rate of unemployment is, say, 3%, while A is equal to 1, if the authorities target 7% decrease in inflation, then to achieve this in 1 year, equation 9.2 says that unemployment must fall by 10%. This is demonstrated below. Thus, if the authorities intend to reduce inflation by 7%, our equation tells us that unemployment will fall by 10% while output will fall by 2.5% if all structural parameters are well articulated. Now, consider the fact that the authorities intend to reduce inflation further. It must be the case that unemployment increases the more while output will reduce. This analysis then tells us that it appears the authorities do not know the implication of inflation reduction. Note that the fall in output may also lead to bankruptcies, welfare loss, and so on. The lesson from the analysis is that it is advisable to achieve the objective over a fairly number of years, say 7% years. The analysis tells us that the monetary authorities are not actually or directly controlling inflation, but they are controlling monetary growth, the monetary base. Example, if wage setters considers the authorities to be credible, serious with their determination with reducing inflation from 10% to 3%, and if they follow up by forming expectation that inflation will fall by 7%, then inflation will actually fall by 7% so that inflation will be 3% and unemployment will remain at its natural rate. It follows that if the wage setters find the monetary authorities to be credible, trustworthy, there will not be economic recession when the authorities reduce money growth and hence inflation. In particular, monetary credibility is the main driver of how inflation targeting affects unemployment and output growth. If the monetary authorities are credible, then reducing inflation via reduction in monetary base will not cause recession, but may likely cause very slightly decrease in unemployment. But if the monetary authorities are not credible, reduction in inflation will have serious negative effect on unemployment and output growth. According to Fisher, even if monetary authorities are credible, continuous decrease in monetary base could lead to high unemployment. Thus, Fisher advised that the authorities would do well by announcing the policy of inflation reduction in advance before its implementation. By so doing, and if the monetary authorities are perceived to be credible, the time lag will be sufficient for the wage and price setters to adjust wages and prices with respect to the authorities' inflation target. Taylor pointed out that wages are not signed and agreed upon at the same time, but signed in a staggered different time. Thus, the staggering wage decisions tend to intensify the limit of the speed with which low inflation will proceed without staggering unemployment in the presence of the monetary credibility. Why should this be? Consider an economy where wages are set differently irrespective of skills. Now, assuming that workers in Ibadan, say, possess the same skills as those in Lagos, workers in Ibadan will set their wages relative to those in Lagos. Thus, if nominal money growth falls rapidly, inflation may not fall proportionately. What will happen is that real money stock will fall, and this will lead to recession and hence increase in unemployment. Thus, what we can learn from all this is that if the monetary authorities are not credible, wage and price setters will not take them serious even when they wanted to reduce inflation, and as a result, there will be a reduction in output growth and increase in unemployment. If monetary authorities are credible, wage and price setters will take them serious and also adjust wages and prices with respect to inflation adjustment, and so unemployment will at worst fall slightly without any noticeable decline in output. If the monetary authorities are credible but wage contracts and prices are rigid downwards, inflation reduction could lead to decrease in output and large increase in unemployment. Summary: to understand the link between inflation, unemployment and output, we should consider three important channels. First, we should consider the Phillips curve that relates unemployment to change in inflation. Second, we should consider the Okun's law that relates change in unemployment to deviation of actual output growth rate. Third, we then consider the aggregate demand relation that shows the relationship between output growth and the growth of monetary base. Because of the fact that increase in monetary base leads to one-for-one increase in inflation and leaves output unaffected, inflation is a monetary phenomenon. Phillips curve better captures the inverse relationship between change in inflation and change in unemployment. In the long run, changes in inflation have no effect on unemployment because unemployment is at its natural rate. At the natural rate of unemployment, output grows at its normal rate, and so there will be a proportionate increase in the growth rate of monetary base and inflation. In the short run, decrease in money growth used to reduce inflation will turn out to reduce output growth and increase growth rate of unemployment. That is, reduction in inflation will lead to increase in unemployment. However, how much growth of unemployment will be is unclear. The traditional approach to inflation reduction assumes that wage and price setters do not consider the monetary authorities to be credible, and therefore they do not change their way of forming expectations about inflation leads to increase in unemployment and decrease in output growth. However, if such inflation targeting is spread, it will not affect the economy greatly. But if the monetary authorities are credible, the modern approach predicts that reduction in inflation will not lead to unemployment, neither will it cause economic recession. Another modern approach is that wage and price rigidities will cast doubt on how reduction in inflation will lead to reduction in unemployment and increase in output even if the monetary authorities are credible. This is the end of study section 9. Thanks for listening.